Chapter 1290, One King Kong. Although he knew that Liang Yu was very strong, when had Zhang Yi ever taken a risk? In this kind of round-robin battle, it was natural to let the cannon fodder go to explore the way first and test the opponent's background. So long Deji nodded. Then he looked to the side, and that was Cheongda, the commander-in-chief of the private guard. You go first. Cheongda had also read books and knew the story of Tianji's horse racing. But the men of the snowy plateau are all brave. When has he ever been afraid of death? Paji Gaseng also gave Cheongda a firm look. If you can't beat him, admit defeat and don't hold on. Paji Gaseng reminded seriously. This kind of round-robin battle is very cruel. In the past of the snowy region, families often fought such duels to compete for pastures and water sources. Although as long as you admit defeat, the other party usually won't kill you. But these men in the snowy region regard admitting defeat on the battlefield as a shame, and would rather die in battle than surrender. But now, Cheongda is also one of the important fighting forces of the Paji family. He would rather Cheongda fail than die in battle. Cheongda hesitated for a moment, but still nodded and said in a muffled voice, "Master, I know." Both sides withdrew their soldiers, and on the huge snowfield in front of Nahama City, a huge battlefield was cleared for the soldiers. The two sides confronted each other across the snowfield, and Cheongda was the first to come to the battlefield. He walked over with an exaggerated attitude, and then tore off his robe, revealing his strong and solid muscles. As a strengthening alien, he was not used to using that kind of thin combat uniform to protect his body. "Come on, who are you sending? Come and die. Let me show you how powerful my Paji family is," Cheongda shouted loudly, without any fear on his face, but a hearty laugh. Seeing this, Deji's eyes fell on Luminoju and Xiaja Jiatsua. "This time, each of our three families will send one person. Don't be selfish. Send out all the powerful aliens under your command." Luminoju and Xiaja Jiatsua were also in a dilemma at this time. In the round-robin battle, 3-3, the people sent out basically had a hard time surviving. At the end of the fight, it was normal for 5 people to die and 1 person to survive. Even in the most tragic times, all 6 people died. They were reluctant to let their men participate in the battle, but since they were here, they would not be able to satisfy Deji if they did not send people out. They could not afford the consequences of offending Songjia Temple and the Yashiling Tai family. Lumen Oju's face was pale, and he said reluctantly, "Let our Lumen family warriors fight first." Since it was a round-robin battle, both sides must leave the strongest people for the last. So let her men take the lead, and the probability of winning is the highest. In the first round, both sides basically would not send out the most powerful people, with the idea of testing each other's background. Luminoju asked for a fight, and Deji and Xiaja Gyatso had no objection. She came to the back and called one of her right-hand men. "Geli, come here." A burly man with 2 pigtails walked up to Luminoju and bowed. "Master, do you want me to fight?" His skin was dark and cracked. He did not look like a noble man, but rather like a shepherd that could be seen everywhere in the snowy plateau. Geli was indeed not from the Ramin family, and he had no surname. A surname was something that only nobles in the snowy plateau were qualified to have. Ramin Oju looked at his loyal subordinate, this shepherd with supernatural powers, who had won battle after battle for the Ramin family. Even this proud woman felt a little distressed when she looked at him. Geli was almost certain to die in this battle. Because Deji was watching the battle, she could not let Geli admit defeat, as that would be a shame for the entire Ramin family, and Deji would not allow it. Only if he died would the Yashiling Tai family owe the Ramin family a huge favor. She stretched out her hand, her pale right hand as skinny as a chicken claw, and her hand fell on Geli's head. "Grr, you must fight well in this battle, and don't lose the face of the Lumen family. If you win, I can allow you to officially become a member of the Lumen family from now on. Even if you die in battle, your son can also have the noble surname of Lumen." Gaseng's eyes were full of excitement. It was his greatest wish in this life to be given a surname and become a member of the most noble surname in the Snowy Plateau. I will obey your orders, my lord. Gesang stood up, straightened his waist, and his body was almost twice as big as Luminoju. This man, who was more than 2 meters tall and looked like a brown bear, walked through the army formation and walked towards the battlefield. Cheongda and Gesang were separated by a distance of hundreds of meters, staring at each other coldly. In their eyes, the other party was as small as an ant, but they both released the momentum of a giant. It was a momentum that had nothing to do with strength and was fearless, the momentum of a warrior. Cheongda put away the smile at the corner of his mouth, and his face became extremely serious. Even if Paji Gesang allowed him to surrender, he knew that he would not do so. Surrendering in front of the armies of the 4 major families will be a disgrace to the entire Snowy Plateau. That is more difficult to accept than death. But since you have to die, then die magnificently and shed your hot blood on the battlefield. Zhang Yi, Liang Yu, and others were in the back, staring at the battle without blinking. Zhang Yi was not arrogant. His ability level was higher than these people, but his combat experience was not necessarily the same. Watching the battle between strong men was an excellent learning opportunity. Liang Yu watched more attentively, because soon she would also go on stage to participate in the battle, so she had to remember the ability of each opponent. Cheongda and Geli both used their abilities at the first time. Angry Vajra. 8-armed Vajra. It seems that these tantric believers like to be named Vajra. After all, they dare not touch the code names of Buddha and Bodhisattva. Cheongda turned into a giant with a black body, with angry eyes and a body like black iron. And Geli's already huge body grew a little bigger, and he actually grew 6 thick arms from his side. On the Ramin family side, aliens immediately threw weapons at him. Jello quickly reached out to catch them. The demon-subduing pestle, the Vajra stick, the demon-subduing circle, and the demon-suppressing sword, for pairs of 8 items, were all in his hands. Cheongda only had one weapon, which was his iron-like body. After the transformation, the two of them roared loudly, and then the 2 giants crushed the ice and snow under their feet and rushed towards each other in an instant. Aha! Aha! The roar was magnificent, like a madman, with a resolute death and a magnificent fighting spirit. 2 broken ice and snow roads were left under the feet of the 2, and the sky full of ice and snow rushed into the sky behind them. A few seconds later, the 2 Vajras collided fiercely. Chapter 1292, 8-armed Vajra versus Wrathful Vajra. Cheongda and Geli are both melee combat aliens of the strengthening system. Perhaps it is related to the folk customs of the Snowy Plateau. Their men are more keen on close combat. The 2 people collided with each other, and in an instant, they began to fight madly. The violent sound was like thunder, which made the people watching the battle from 1,000 meters away feel frightened. Geli's incarnation of the 8-armed Vajra took advantage of having many hands and attacked Cheongda's vitals madly. But in the face of these attacks, Cheongda used his combat experience to avoid the attack on the vitals. His skin is like metal, which has strong defensive power. As long as the vitals are not hit, the skin breaking and bleeding in other places are just minor injuries. The angry Vajra, when he is extremely angry, his combat power is the strongest. And the bleeding makes Cheongda's attack even more fierce. The dark arms are like 2 iron pillars, and the fists are like copper hammers, aiming at Geli's head and blasting it hard. With one punch, even the air made a sonic boom. Geli immediately blocked his head with 2 arms, and the other 6 arms were still attacking madly.
Boom, 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 boom.
There were thunderous sounds on the battlefield. Their bodies were huge, but their movements did not seem slow at all. Instead, they were extremely agile. Even Zhang Yi had to use his ability of space acceleration to enhance his ability of dynamic capture in order to see their movements. When he saw the fight between the 2, Zhang Yi couldn't help but take a breath. At the beginning, the 2 did not hold back at all, and it was a fight for life. Geli's weapon fiercely chopped on Cheongda's body. Cheongda's eyes were red, and he only avoided the attack on the vital parts. His fists were like two copper hammers, aiming at Gelly's head and chest. The battlefield was filled with the sound of fists colliding, and the roars from the two people's mouths made many private soldiers look pale. The clan leaders of both sides looked at the center of the battlefield with solemn faces, praying in their hearts that their warriors would kill their opponents quickly. After watching for a while, Zhang Yi felt that Cheongda was not doing well. In terms of strength, Cheongda had the upper hand. But the other person has 8 hands and he only has 2, which means that his attack will always be blocked by the opponent. But it is difficult for him to take the opponent's attack. That guy is very smart, Zhang Yi commented lightly. Liang Yu glanced at Zhang Yi, but said just a little cleverness. Oh. Zhang Yi looked at her curiously. Liang Yu said, "Why do people have 2 arms? Isn't it more convenient to work with more arms? Not only humans, lions, tigers, elks, and horses all have 4 limbs. It's not that the more limbs, the better. God gave us 4 limbs because it is the most coordinated proportion." Zhang Yi carefully observed Gesang's fighting style after hearing this, and found that he was not coordinated when he attacked. With 8 arms, it is impossible to use all the strength, and it will form a burden on each other and disperse the strength. Zhang Yi smiled lightly. It is indeed a little cleverness. But soon, he put away his smile. But little cleverness is also very useful. Gesang knows his ability better than anyone else, and naturally knows that it is impossible for 8 arms to fully exert their strength. So he did a good job of coordinating the primary and secondary. His 2 original arms were used to wrestle with Cheongda, bearing Cheongda's bombardment head-on. The other arms were used to secretly attack from below, leaving wounds on Cheongda's body. Cheongda's body was as strong as steel, but it was not without weaknesses. Gesang focused on attacking his lower abdomen. This seemed despicable, but in actual combat, as long as it could kill the opponent, everything would be used to the extreme. Even in the martial arts moves that Liang Yu taught Zhang Yi, many killing moves were to attack the lower 3 roads. It sounds bad, but it is really easy to use. Cheongda's face suddenly became ugly. As a man, that place is definitely the most vulnerable. If it is attacked, even if the opponent does not use much force, it can make him lose his combat effectiveness instantly. Asshole. Cheongda cursed angrily and immediately kicked his feet hard on the ground, leaping to the back to try to distance himself from Gesang. But Gesang was not willing to give Cheongda a chance and quickly chased after him, slashing at him head-on with 8 weapons in his hands. There were bursts of explosions in the air, and Liang Yu shook her head as she watched from the side. Zhang Yi understood that in the eyes of this martial arts master, the fight between these 2 people had no skills at all. They relied entirely on brute force and some fighting methods learned in a short period of time. They were far inferior to Liang Yu, who had received systematic training, and even far inferior to Zhang Yi, who she personally trained. The battle between the enhanced aliens was cruel, but also full of blood. Soon, both of them were covered with wounds. Cheongda's body was covered with wounds left by Gesang's weapons, some deep and some shallow. The wounds were steaming hot, and blood was flowing. Every time he was injured, the red light in his eyes became stronger. But Gesang was not feeling well either. After all, his strength was not as good as Cheongda's. Cheongda hit his head hard with a punch, and the left half of his face was bloody, and his eyes could hardly see anything. Chapter 1293. First Battle Lost. Paja Jesang's words made Zhang Yi look sideways. He just remembered that Paja Jesang was just a good guy in front of him, looking harmless. But how could someone who could become a hegemon in the southwest region be a kind-hearted person? It's up to you. I'm just reminding you that it's not easy to train an alien like Cheongda. Zhang Yi was too lazy to meddle in other people's business. Since Paja Jesang didn't care about the life and death of his men, Zhang Yi didn't care even more. Paja Jesang also had an account in his mind. Training Cheongda did cost him a lot of resources. But if he lost this time, the consequences would be unbearable for him. But suddenly Paja Jesang thought of something. He was also too concerned about winning, and he forgot that if he lost this time, it would be difficult for Zhang Yi to deal with it. So, Zhang Yi must have said this with full confidence. If that's the case. Pajajesang's eyes rolled, and he suddenly sighed. You're right, I can't be so selfish. Cheongda is my precious subordinate. I have to save his life. Cheongda and Gelly on the battlefield were already bloodthirsty, and they were close to being exhausted, and only one step away from death. At this time, Paji Gesang suddenly used a loudspeaker to shout loudly. Stop, stop it. Don't fight anymore. This battle, our Paji family lost. This sentence spread throughout the battlefield, and everyone was shocked. They didn't expect that Paji Gesang would admit defeat when the victory was not decided. Daiji and others were surprised. Is Paji Gesang crazy? He actually gave the victory to others. They couldn't understand Paji Gesang's behavior. Not to mention them, even the two people on the battlefield couldn't understand it. Although Gelly was surprised, he was relieved. He immediately retreated and stopped fighting. The victory was decided, and he wanted to save his strength. If possible, the master asked him to retreat, and he could still save his life. Not afraid of death, but it doesn't mean he likes to die. Cheongda stood there in a daze, with 2 lines of hot tears flowing from the corners of his eyes. He turned around and shouted angrily in the direction of Pajajesang. No, Master, I can die in battle, but I will never admit defeat. Pajajesang said loudly, Cheongda, you didn't lose. But I, Pajajesang, will not sacrifice my most loyal right-hand man for a victory. These words gave Cheongda enough face. He knew that for a man in the snow region, he could die, but he could not become a laughingstock. Sure enough, Cheongda's heart loosened a little. What followed was endless touching. For someone like me, you shouldn't do this. Cheongda knelt on the ground crying, and his rolling tears melted the ice and snow under him. Pajajesang asked someone to go over and immediately treat Cheongda and comforted him. However, he still said to Zhang Yi cautiously, Sir, we lost the first battle. The next battle. Zhang Yi glanced at him and said, Don't worry. We can't lose. Of course, he can't lose. Zhang Yi has a way to win. Paji Gesang was relieved. Although he didn't know where Zhang Yi got such confidence from, he believed that Zhang Yi would send out strong men to fight. The first round ended with Paji Gesang admitting defeat. There was a burst of extremely excited shouts from the camp of the 3 coalition forces. This greatly boosted their morale. On the other hand, there was a somewhat depressing atmosphere on the side of the Paji family. Paji Gesang looked at his personal guard, Solong Daiji. This was the first warrior of the Paji family and the strongest fighting force. He and Paji Gesang were almost inseparable. Even when he slept in the room next to Paji Gesang. Solong Daiji, it's your turn. Paji Gesang glanced at Zhang Yi and said to him, Dear best, if you are really defeated, surrender. There are nobles to cover us. Solong Daiji hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to be a joke, and he would rather die in battle. However, he was very important to the Paji family. Once an alien like him died in battle, it would be a heavy blow to the Paji family. For the sake of justice, he couldn't die. As Paji Gesang's personal guard, Solong Daiji was not a reckless person, but very smart. So he nodded, Yes, Master, I will remember your instructions. On the other side, after Gelly won, he turned his head and looked into the distance. He was looking at his master, Lumin Oju. It was extremely difficult for him to win this battle. Now he was almost at the end of his strength. If he continued to fight, there would be no possibility of survival. Lumin Oju looked at Daiji on the side. Chiba, my people have one around. Should we change players? Change players? Master Lumin, don't you understand the rules of the round-robin game? Before Daiji could speak, Xia Jia Jiatsua on the other side sneered. Only cowards will leave the battlefield. A true warrior will take it as his honor to fight to the end. Now that the woman of the Lumin family is in charge, have all the men of the Lumin family become cowards? Xia Gyatso certainly didn't want Gelly to retreat, because the next person to appear is from their Xia family. He would rather let Gelly die and let him force out some tricks from the opponent's warriors before he dies, and it would be best if he could inflict heavy damage. Nonsense. Shizha Gyatso, you'd better take that back. Luminoju stared at Shizha Gyatso viciously. But Shizha Gyatso didn't care at all, and sneered and said, "Those who appear must fight to the death and must not retreat halfway." He looked at Deji. "Otherwise, if we lose this battle, how can we keep the face of our three families and the face of Songjia Temple?" Deji glanced at Lumin Oju lightly, with an irresistible look in his eyes. "Master Lumin, let that warrior fight to the end like a man." Lumin Oju suppressed her anger and clenched her fists. But in the end, she could only grit her teeth and say helplessly, "Okay." Jelluo did not wait for the order for him to leave. Although he knew that this would be the outcome, he had a little expectation.
But
he was helpless about this result. Die, then die. Jelluo slowly closed his eyes, put his hands together in front of his chest, and prayed to the Buddha, hoping that he could enter the Western paradise after his death. Then he opened his eyes, and his eyes showed a resolute look. Soon, Solong Deji appeared on the battlefield. In his hand, he held a Vajra stick, which was nearly 1 person tall, bronze, and shaped like a long stick, but the end was a sharp cone. Solong Deji walked onto the battlefield, looked at Jelluo, who was determined to die, and slowly and firmly raised his left palm to his chest. "Gelly, I'll take you on your ways." His chest was also hit hard, and it was visibly sunken by 1 or 2 centimeters. The battle was bloody and cruel. As a reinforcement-type alien, they were extremely powerful in both strength and defense, so it was difficult for them to die. A fierce battle lasted for dozens of minutes. Cheongda's body was covered with blood, and 2 broken swords were stuck in his body. And Gasang was not much better. He coughed up blood from the corners of his mouth, and it flowed down his long beard, dripping and soaking his clothes. Seeing the scene, Paji Gasang closed his eyes and silently rolled the red sandalwood rosary in his hand. Lumin Oju on the other side had no expression on her face, but her face seemed to be a little paler. The result of continuing to fight would be that both of them would die. But now no one can call a halt. Whoever calls a halt is equivalent to admitting this defeat. Zhang Yi looked at such a bloody battle, hugged his arms, and turned his head lightly to look at Paji Gasang, who closed his eyes and prayed. "We can't fight anymore. If we continue, we will die. What will happen if you call for a stop?" Paji Gasang opened his eyes upon hearing this and said quickly, "No. If we call for a stop, the reputation of my Paji family will be humiliated. Cheongda will not accept the humiliation of failure." Zhang Yi said impatiently, "Will it affect the outcome of the entire battles?" Paji Gasang was stunned for a moment. Only then did he realize that both Cheongda and Gelly were seriously injured at this time. No matter who wins or loses, the next person will die in the next battle. After all, this is a round-robin battle. So even if they admit defeat in this battle, it doesn't seem to have much impact on the entire battle. But if we call for a stop and the other side lets the dying guy continue to fight, if he fights to the death and injures our people, then won't we suffer a great loss? Paji Gasang said with gritted teeth, not giving up. Chapter 1294. Fatal Blow. Solong Deji held the Vajra stick in his hand and looked at Gelly with neither joy nor sorrow, only a cold, killing intent.
Swish.
Holding the stick, he turned into a flash of lightning and suddenly rushed towards Gelly. A fierce storm formed behind him, and because of his fast speed, it swept up a long and mighty wind. Gelly straightened his chest, waved his 8 arms with weapons, gritted his teeth, and wanted to use his life to test Solong Deji's background, or even inflict heavy damage on him. In a flash, Solong Deji had already come close to Gelly. The Vajra stick smashed down head-on. Bang! Gelly's 2 demon-subduing pestles blocked in front of him, but were directly knocked away by Solong Deji, and blood flowed from the knuckles of his hands. The stick passed through his arm and fell directly on Gelly's shoulder. With just 1 blow, Gelly's left shoulder was broken, and 1 arm fell limply. Solong Deji, a reinforcement mutant, ability codename, Ascetic, ability index 9,800 points. He is similar to Liang Yu. Both of them are the purest reinforcement mutants. After mutation, He only strengthened the basic qualities of his body and still chose to fight with human posture and ability. In the past, Solong Daeji was the law enforcer of the Paji family. He only believed in the diamond stick in his hand, thinking that it was a symbol of power. Therefore, he did not bother to make himself stronger by turning himself into a giant or having fancy abilities. He thought that doing so was just to cover up the weakness of his body and the fear in his heart. After Gelly's transformation, the 8-armed diamond was 5 or 6 times bigger than him. Solong Daeji was like a weak baby in front of Gelly. But his attack directly blasted Gelly to the point of being seriously injured and dying. Gelly, who was already seriously injured, was even more defeated by Solong Daeji at this time. Although he had 8 arms, he had no power to resist in front of Solong Daeji's diamond stick. Solong Daeji didn't say a word. Every time he smashed down with the Vajra staff, a huge gust of wind would be raised, and the buzzing sound was as piercing as a fighter plane passing by. The fierce wind could even make Gelly's footsteps unstable. Even when facing a seriously injured opponent, Solong Daeji did not relax at all, because he knew that this battle was far from over. Next, he had to face 2 opponents from the enemy. Puff, puff, puff. Solong Daeji flexibly flashed around Gelly's body. Whether in speed or strength, he was far superior to the wounded Gelly. With one blow, he broke Gelly's knee. The huge Vajra body fell to the ground with a bang, and the next blow was like a judgment of gods and Buddhas, hitting Gelly's head. Gelly blocked with his right arm and only heard a crack. His arm was immediately smashed to pieces, half of his arm was thrown out, and blood splattered. Solong Daeji coldly turned the Vajra staff in his hand upside down and stabbed Gelly's head with the spiked end. At this moment, Gelluo, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly opened his mouth and bit hard. Crack! A harsh sound rang out on the battlefield, and Gelluo desperately bit the Vajra stick with his teeth. Solong Daeji's strength was very huge, and his teeth were ground and several of them were broken. But Gelluo bit the Vajra stick with all his might, and Solong Daeji didn't expect that he would dare to bite his Vajra stick with his mouth. Because if he failed to do so, his head would be pierced. He underestimated Gelluo's determination. Gelluo knew that he would die, so he could naturally use his life to exchange for something. For example, Solong Daeji's injury. Puff! The Vajra stick passed through Gelluo's teeth and finally pierced his throat, and blood flowed along the Vajra stick. But at the same time, Gelluo desperately hugged Solong Daeji in front of him with his arms. Roar! Gelly let out a howl that was completely unlike a human with his broken throat. His arms swelled up like balloons, and then he used up all his strength in his life to lock Solong Daeji tightly. When a person is dying, the power he bursts out can exceed his limit. Solong Daeji's face suddenly turned pale. Even though he had a strengthened body, he felt that he was locked tightly by 2 iron hoops at this time. The huge force squeezed his body and twisted his internal organs. Ah! Solong Daeji was also ruthless. He used all his strength to use the diamond stick in his hand. Puff! It went straight through Gelly's head and went out from the back of his head. Gelly finally died, but until his death, he opened his scarlet eyes and locked Solong Daeji tightly with his arms. Solong Daeji spurted blood from his mouth with a wow. He used all his strength to escape from the restraints of the corpse, but looking at his face, he was obviously a little pale. Such a scene made Pajajesang's pupils shrink sharply. It's bad. The thing he was most worried about came true. Geller, who was already dead, still injured Solong Daeji with the power he burst out before dying. The vitality of the enhanced aliens is the strongest, and this situation is also common. Therefore, when fighting with them, you can't be negligent in the slightest. Now Solong Daeji was injured. Even if the injury was not too serious, there was still a fierce battle to be fought. It was obvious that Solong Daeji had fallen into an unfavorable situation before the battle. On the other hand, everyone in the 3 coalition forces was smiling. The second alien of the Paji family was also injured, and it seemed that the next battle was stable. Woman Oju looked at Geli, who died in the battle, and there was a trace of sadness in her heart, but there was no expression on her face, just straightened her back. My sons of the Lumen family should be like this. Xiaxia Jutswa smiled. Then next, it's the turn of our Xiaxia family warriors to appear. Xiaxia Jutswa waved behind him, and a fat, bald, strong man slowly walked over. Every step he took, the people next to him could clearly feel the tremor of the ground under his feet. This was a strong man weighing more than 400 kilograms, like a large Maitreya Buddha, with a greasy face, but there was no mercy of Buddha in his eyes, only fierce anger. Luoseng, you play in the next game. Luoseng nodded and bowed. Master, Chiba, I will definitely win this victory. After he finished speaking, he turned around and left the place with a bang, bang, bang. On the side of the Paji family, everyone was even more anxious. Solong Deji was injured, and the injury was not light. If they lost the next battle, wouldn't they be finished? It's no wonder they thought so. If Solong Deji, who has an ability index of 9,800 points, failed, the next person waiting would have to face two opponents.
They
couldn't help but wonder, no matter how strong the guests of these masters are, as long as they are not Epsilon, how can they beat the opponent? What's more, the Yashalangtai family must have a more terrible backup. Chapter 1295 Buddha, Lamp Maitreya. Suolong Deji's injury made Paji Gesang's heart rise to his throat. He looked at Zhang Yi with some resentment, as if to say, "See, I said that we can't be soft-hearted. What should we do now?" He also knew that if the Paji family really lost this time, Zhang Yi would never stand up and let others deal with it. But it would be very ugly to tear the face at that time, and Zhang Yi would be exposed in advance. He didn't know that Zhang Yi had already contacted the funeral master. "My dear, are you really sure that we can win?" Paji Gesang confirmed again, with some worry. Zhang Yi said lightly, "Just put your heart back in your stomach." I said, "We can't lose." When Zhang Yi said this, even Liang Yu next to him couldn't help but glance at him. To be honest, Liang Yu is very confident in her own strength. But she is not invincible. There are so many masters in the world, and there are talented people in all parties. She dare not guarantee that she will win. And where does Zhang Yi get the confidence? Zhang Yi didn't say much, just let Paji Gesang watch the show. Paji Gesang had no choice but to believe Zhang Yi at this time. So, in the next battle, even if Solong Deji had been seriously injured, he had to bite the bullet and fight on. On the other side, Xiaxia Luoseng was not in a hurry to go to the battlefield. When he arrived in front of the battlefield, the people of the Xiaxia family had prepared an open space for him, and there were several strong men carrying a large vat there. Everyone stared at Luoseng, wondering what this guy was going to do. Luoseng, one of the most important fighting forces of the Xiaxia family. The other families didn't know much about his intelligence, because as a basic fighting force, he would not easily fight with others. Even if a fight broke out, there were very few people on the snowy plateau who could force him to use all his strength. At this time, Luoseng took off his shirt, revealing his fat body, and sat cross-legged directly on the cold snow. Then a soldier opened the vat, scooped out a ladle of yellow clear liquid, and poured it on Luoseng. "What is that? Is it some kind of tantric enchantment rituals?" Fatty Sue turned on the telescope mode and was amazed at the scene.
He is still so fat at this time.
This guy doesn't pay attention to his health. He is not as fat as me. Fatty Sue saw that someone was fatter than him, and he was proud, as if to say that he was not fatter than this person. Paji Gesang said seriously, "It's oil. He is pouring ghee on himself." Hearing this, Zhang Yi and others were a little surprised. What's the matter? Is he going to make himself into a barbecue? Is he so sincere? Paji Gesang took a deep breath and said to several people, "Lozang's ability is flame." Flame? Zhang Yi was a little surprised when he heard this ability. It has been too long since I have seen an alien with the ability of fire. After the Ice Age, the weather was cold, and the environment of nature was naturally suppressive to aliens who use fire. Of course, some special fire abilities are exceptions. For example, Suzaku Jianghan's Ice Flame, or Xiao Honglian's fire-breathing ability. The black flame that Zhang Yi disguised was actually the devouring power of the void. This is easy to explain because the flame is too easy to be extinguished by ice and snow, and its release will absorb a lot of heat energy by the ice and snow in the environment. However, this does not mean that the flame ability is not strong enough. Burning is one of the earliest energies mastered by humans, and humans' worship of fire is engraved in their bones. As long as this power is used properly, it can still cause extremely terrifying destructive power. I just don't know how the fat man Luosang on the opposite side will fight. Luosang sat cross-legged on the snow, allowing one ladle after another of ghee to pour on him. His thick skin and flesh seemed to be able to breathe, wrapping the thick ghee into his skin and flesh. After a while, he was covered with orange-yellow ghee, which looked sticky, just like the ancient flesh and blood Buddha. When Zhang Yi saw this scene, he thought of Xiao Honglian, the person in charge of the Yangqing base in Tianhai City. With the help of external objects? When Xiao Honglian used her supernatural powers, she would also use high-concentration alcohol or gasoline. It seems that this fat man has the same ability as Xiao Honglian. Sure enough, what happened next confirmed Zhang Yi's guess. 1/3 of the ghee in the huge oil tank that was as tall as a person was poured on Luosang's body. After he was covered with ghee, he slowly stood up, raised the tank of ghee with both hands, and then poured it into his big mouth. Sure enough, it's just as I imagined. Zhang Yi thought of this and said something to Paji Gasang. Although it was just a small piece of information, Paji Gasang did not dare to neglect it at all, and quickly told Solong Deji. Solong Deji frowned slightly when he heard it. He held the Vajra stick in his hand, thought about it, looked at the entire battlefield, looked at the ground under his feet, and had some ideas. And at this time, Luosang, who had already prepared, finally arrived on the battlefield. This is not a competition and no one needs to shout to start. After stepping onto the battlefield, one of the two people must fall. Luosang's huge body was covered with sticky ghee. He touched his bald head and suddenly opened his mouth. The mouth opened at an angle that humans could hardly imagine, like the mouth of a jackal, tiger, or leopard. How? An extremely harsh roar, accompanied by a strong wind, blew across the entire snowfield. The wind swept over Solong Deji, and his face suddenly became ugly. Halitosis, people from both camps. Although what Solong Deji said was probably true, is it really okay to say that in such a serious occasion that determines life and death? Ahahaha. Luosang suddenly patted his belly and laughed loudly. As he laughed, his body suddenly boomed and burned with a raging flame. However, the flame was not ordinary yellow, but golden. Behind him, a golden flame halo rose. He laughed out loud, patted his belly, and a golden light shone behind him, just like the legendary Maitreya Buddha. Luosang, the top warrior of the Xiaozhou family, is a special ability user with the ability code Buddha Lamp Maitreya. The ability index is 9,700 points. Luosang suddenly supported the ground with his fat arms, and the whole person was like a huge meat bag. A golden flame spewed out of his mouth, which actually forked from the middle and then rushed to the battlefield along the left and right sides. Solong Deji responded to all changes with the same attitude and watched Luosang's methods with cold eyes. A few seconds later, a raging fire was burning around the entire battlefield. It was a circle of fire with a radius of about 1 kilometer, and the flames were nearly 2 meters high. The next moment, Luosang landed on all fours. His originally extremely fat body was as flexible as a cheetah, and he rushed straight to Solong Deji like a cannonball. Solong Deji's feet were firmly rooted in the snow, and his right hand tightly grasped the Vajra staff. This video ends here. Thanks for staying tuned. More videos coming soon. Please like and comment if you liked it.